Hi, welcome everyone to the IAPP web conference From Programs to Programmatic, New Mindsets and Methods for Privacy Challenges, sponsored by Ketch. My name is Jordan Hardy, Virtual Programming Coordinator here at the IAPP, and I'll be your host for today's program. We'll be getting started with the presentation in just a minute, but before we do, just a couple program details. Participating in today's web conference will automatically provide IAPP certified privacy professionals who are the named registrants with 1 CPE credit. Others who are listening in can apply for those credits through an easy to use online form on our website. I also want to let you know that a recording for this program will be available in your My IAPP, My Purchases, My Recordings portal within 48 hours. I also want to let you know that the views expressed in this program are the panelists' own and don't reflect the views of their organization. Also, please feel free to post any questions you have for the panelists in the open chat area at the bottom of the Zoom tool panel. Now on to our program. I'd like to introduce today's panelists. First, I'd like to introduce Stephanie Adamson King, General Counsel at Placo. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us. Can you give us a little bit insight into your background and current role at Placo?
Absolutely. Thank you for that introduction. I am currently General Counsel at Placo Global. We are an instant gaming company or a technology company building games, and you may see us on platforms like Facebook and Zoom and Snap and others. And previously I was at Twitter and head of privacy and product for the legal team there. And prior to that, a GC at an ad tech company in the throes of GDPR and managing that back in 2018. So I'm very excited to be here today. Thank you so much for having me, IAPP and Ketch.
Perfect. Thank you, Stephanie. I'd also like to introduce Robert Cunningham. Robert is the head of legal at Ketch. Robert, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Could you tell us a little bit more about your current role as well?
Hi, everybody. Excited to chat with you today. Thanks for joining us. I'm, as Jordan said, head of legal at Ketch. I'll leave it to my colleague JJ to describe Ketch in a little bit more detail. He's just so good at it. But I am a privacy attorney by specialty and was a generalist before that. And I've had experience at large and small companies, most recently at Salesforce, on the legal team at Salesforce prior to joining Ketch. Look forward to chatting with everyone today.
Absolutely. And last but not least, to round out the panel, we have Jonathan Joseph, Head of Customer Solutions at Ketch. Jonathan will also moderate your incoming questions in the chat for today's program, so I'll just look out for that. Jonathan, it's a pleasure to have you. Can you tell us a bit about your background and current role?
Yeah, thanks, Jordan, and thanks, Robert, for going off script like that. I always appreciate that. So I lead customer solutions strategy at Ketch. My background has been in disruptive technologies. I think we're going through that in some regards with privacy. Looking forward to talking to you. I'll ask questions anytime you want. If it's something we're going to address, we'll address it straight away if we can. Otherwise, we'll take questions at the end as well. Over to you. And by the way, apologies for the voice here. I'm coming down with a cold. Can't do anything about the Australian accent, so that's it's going to stay.
It's fine. I'm sure people will listen to you the most because of your accent. So thank you all so much for joining us today. I'll turn it over to Robert to take it away from here.
Thanks so much, Jordan. And we're going to start with a poll for folks to participate in. Let's get interactive right from the jump. I'm going to read it out so that folks who watch this later will know what we're talking about. But the poll question says, how far along is your organization in evaluating enterprise privacy software? And the options are nowhere, do we need it? Or have started to look? Or have bought it, but don't like it? And the last one is have bought it and like it. So feel free to populate the responses, and I'm going to close it down in about, I'll give you a 3, 2, 1, end poll. All right, so let's all, panelists anyway, let's take a look at what we've got here. So looks like no one was willing to go with have bought it but don't like it, so that's good, I think. Have started to look is about half of folks, great. Nowhere do we need it. I should say next is have bought it and like it at 27%. And then at 22% is nowhere do we need it. So I guess that's about what I would expect. JJ or Stephanie, any thoughts in reaction to the poll?
No, totally. I mean, one of the things we noticed about this summer is a whole lot more interest in privacy solutions. My hypothesis is that it's starting to heat up in the US. And so you're getting, now 4 states with privacy regulations. Folks are thinking about CPRA in 2023. And so that makes sense. The one I'm super curious about is the nowhere do we need it, which is super interesting because that's, I mean, Robert, we talk about this a lot, right? To what extent do you say, I'm just going to hide in the herd here and not have a privacy solution so I can maximize data utilization, perhaps, because some privacy can be a little restrictive to data coming into the business. Of course, we have a solution for that, but yeah, what do you think, Stephanie?
I would agree with that. I think the nowhere do we need it may also be companies that aren't as data heavy or are able to manage currently manually. And so that might be part of it as well.
Well, thanks everyone for being willing to participate right from the start. Reminder that you need to X out of the poll to get it off your screen if you want to be able to see the slides. So feel free to do that. And with that, JJ, I'll turn it over to you to get us rolling.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. And add color as always. So we talk a lot about how complex it is to operationalize privacy in the modern world, and some of this stuff has been well discussed, but some of it isn't obvious. So the first piece is around regulations, right? And this is where I think a lot of the discussion is. It's not just about the volume of regulations. There are 120 countries right now, but it's also about the speed at which regulations are evolving. 4 in the US already. Who knows how many over the next couple of years. Gartner is saying, 25% of the world, population-wise, is covered by modern privacy legislation today, but that number could be something like 70% by 2023. So we're looking at this 2 to 3x increase in the regulations out there. And Stephanie, one of the points you made I thought was interesting in our prep was it hasn't been litigated. Right. So how do you really interpret these laws, and then how do you really know how to snap to those, which I thought was fascinating, which we'll talk about. And then on the second piece of complexity is people, and people is so multidimensional, right? It's organizationally, I think with privacy, we're working with marketing, we're working with data owners, we're working with human resources, we're working with info security in a way that maybe other laws we haven't had to do that. When you're delivering consent, when you're thinking about privacy experiences, it's not just consumers, it's employees, right? So they can take on different personas. And then of course, the way the web works, people don't show up as people, right? We don't show up as Stephanie and Robert. We show up as digital identities. We show up as mobile device IDs. We show up as browser IDs. We show up as cookies. And so there's a complexity there when we're managing people on multiple fronts. And then, of course, as we're orchestrating privacy choices across all the systems which form part of a modern day enterprise, that can get quite complicated. I think on average now, 40 to 60 systems per organization. Even small companies could have at least 10 to 12. And there's more requirements now to deliver privacy choices into those systems. And so a lot of these are connected, of course, right? When you're thinking about digital identities, and you're thinking about orchestrating privacy into systems, those systems may just respond to one. Obviously, the regulations kind of flow through all of this. And we'll talk about each of these, and we'll talk about some of the solutions for that. Robert, anything you would add there, or we can go to the next slide?
What I would add, and what I would encourage folks to consider, is not to get lost in or intimidated by the complexity that JJ just articulated. It's definitely there. And there is a ton of richness and subtlety to these regulations, and there are more of them, weekly or monthly. But as much as they are a challenge, they are more alike than different. And I encourage folks to disagree with me or push back in the chat, and we can talk about that. But by more alike than different, I encourage everyone to consider that if you approach all these various regulations from a posture of what data am I collecting, what am I doing with it, what permission do I have to do that, and how do I respect the customer or employee choices around that data, you will be complying with vastly, the vast majority of the considerations under those regulations. A lot of it does boil into opt out, appropriate disclosure, and then perhaps data subject rights responses from consumers or employees. So we do want to lower the blood pressure and say that if you look for those universal building blocks among these regulations, that's the appropriate way to get started. And then take those building blocks and apply technology solutions, programmatic solutions to them, so that you can maximize the output from what we all acknowledge to be limited size of human teams to be able to address these issues, and save your teams to deal with the stuff that's really importantly complex and unique to your business. So the complexity is there. Look for the building blocks, and that's what we've done at Ketch. Our approach is to find out what's common across these regulations rather than what's different, and get started rather than being intimidated by the complexity. Stephanie, any thoughts on that and how you have historically approached these problems in the past, 3-5 years, back to the time of even a world before GDPR?
I would echo many of the sentiments that you just shared. Really, I think it's not a set it and forget it or one size fits all with privacy. And prior to 2018, there were definitely privacy laws. There are state laws, were international laws, e-privacy directive in Europe, but there weren't huge fines. And so a lot of businesses would look past them, and it was lower on the priority list for just getting a business off the ground or cost of doing business. 2018 with GDPR, everybody knows that did change the mindset and the risk cost benefit analysis for risk. And then we had CCPA, now CPRA, LGPD in Brazil, and as mentioned before, all the state laws that are coming into play. And we're starting to see the contours of GDPR play out in Europe as well. If you are a business that's not just domestic, you will go crazy trying to keep track of all of these if you don't take a risk-based approach. So for example, if you don't have consumers or customers and you don't have employees and you're not touching a country like Brazil, it's probably not in your best interest to really, sit and spend your time trying to get into the weeds of what is LGPD, if that's where your business is right now. It is important to understand where your business wants to go so that you can see around corners a bit for them. But I've tried to go to building blocks, as you mentioned, Robert, and what are first principles, also not a new thing for privacy, but really go back to the first principles, be a good data player. How are you protecting the consumer and making sure you are giving them choice, you are doing opt-in where needed, and you are honoring those choices. That's the big one I always tell my teams is if you made it easy to opt in, you need to make it easy to opt out. You need to honor the consumer choices. And if you lean on that building block, to Robert's point, you will be able to get a lot of the way there. But the next step is understanding where your business is. Where do you have boots on the ground? Where are your consumers? Where are your employees? Where is your data held? Where are your customers if you're B2B? And what matters to them? And pay attention, spend your time understanding and getting into a proactive compliance posture in those jurisdictions.
Stephanie and Robert, one of the concepts that's been fascinating to me is, and we hear this often, GDPR everywhere, CCPA everywhere in the US. And people say that because they perceive that it's easy to administer, to just say, let's take the strictest law out there and just apply it globally and kind of not worry about it. And one of the reasons why I've always wanted to challenge that is because it can be so restrictive to data collection and the data you need to run your business. And I wanted to ask both of you or either one, how do you manage that, right? I mean, one of the things we try to do at Ketch is to say, we want to make it just as easy to deliver a tailored experience by region, leveraging these building blocks, leveraging common sense, as you kind of said, Stephanie. And curious what you thought about that. Is GDPR everywhere a thing that people are saying? Is there valid reasons behind it? Do you believe there's an alternative?
Yeah, I think GDPR it's a risk-based approach. And so I may have an unpopular opinion, but I actually appreciate the risk-based approach because it gives you room to balance for your business. But that's the key. It's balancing and analyzing for your business and understanding the trade-offs. Are you a Twitter where you're in the spotlight or are you not? If you're not, it doesn't mean you can get away with anything at all. You still need to look at what type of data you have, what trust are people putting into you for that data. So that would be how I would take a look at it there.
The trade-off is so key, and data is being the heart of that. You don't have to make sacrifices, right? You need to think about both of those. How do I utilize data that generates growth for my business, but at the same time, espouse trust and be compliant where I need to be. Let's talk about the second one, people. And so this is multidimensional, as we said. The first piece of it is organizationally. One of the things I heard the other day, which I'm not sure I agree with this, I'd love your perspective here, Stephanie, but you were trying to learn from mistakes of the past. And kind of the way it was put to me was, with security, with cybersecurity, we took the obligation away from data owners and we established security teams. And we said, you know what, there's a security team here. They're going to be responsible for this data and responsible for securing it. And privacy seems to be a little different. You know, with privacy, it seems more of a hub and spoke model where there are privacy teams, but we're saying data owners still have the obligation for this. And we're going to coach you on how to deliver that. And we're going to give you the systems to deliver that trust. But the onus is still on you. And it's a different approach, it's a different mindset perhaps, but also it means as a privacy team and teams that you're leading, Stephanie, you're working with multiple parts of the organization. I'm wondering if that's a new thing, you know, dealing with so many stakeholders, and how have you addressed that?
I think that privacy's always had to deal with multiple stakeholders, but people weren't as invested in it, going back to the penalties now, and also going back to your and Robert's comment about having an approach that matches your business. But to get that approach, you really need to understand your business and partner with the stakeholders. I'm a big fan of empowering the front lines so they feel that they're part of the decision making. They understand why they have to make a risk-based trade-off and what the rules are. They're, you know, really hard rules, and then there are risk trade-offs you need to make in the analysis. So you have to partner with the business to be able to do that. What HR needs to, what data HR needs to support a DEI program is one thing, and they need to understand what they're trying to do a good thing, but there's still parameters around what they can do, and working with them so they understand that, and they are partner with you is really key. Then, as you mentioned, marketing teams, does it make sense to blow out your whole email database? Hopefully not. Is there a way that you can work with your team as they're collecting emails so that they identify where they got the emails from and what purpose they got them under, and then they can leverage that data better than if they just threw it into a database and didn't know, which is higher risk. So it is working with those teams so they understand those first principles and can make good decisions on the front line to actually build the data infrastructure that will allow them to use the data in a way that is helping them reach their goals. And therefore, I think it's really critical that there's a lot of cross-functional work. I also try to position it not as a compliance function, even though it is compliance, and there is a compliance piece for sure, but really a business enablement function that's responsible. So you're purposefully making decisions about data. You're not just accidentally falling into them because nobody thought about it.
Thanks for that, Stephanie. Is there precedence for that, for example, for how deeply privacy teams are working with technology teams? Is this new ground? Is there anything we can lean on in your experience?
That's a really good question. I do think historically, in my experience, the business has looked at security as like, oh, the IT or InfoSec team deal with that, and they're doing it in the back. And hopefully this will help bring forward InfoSec and all the work that they're doing, especially in the current day and age, because you can't have privacy without security. But privacy are things that people see, consumers see. They see your privacy notice. They see your cookie consent banners. They see the opt-ins and opt-outs. Their experience with the product is changed, hopefully for the better, as companies are trying to adjust to this new privacy world. And I think that is different from the past, where a lot of the business was like, well, someone else is dealing with that and I don't see it. And maybe I'm annoyed because I now have to use a password on multiple things. This is different because it is impacting the consumer's experience and what the world sees, how the world sees the business.
And it could be that the world's changed, right? The world now more data driven than ever. You know, we talked about 60 systems on average per enterprise. So let's talk about that a little. The data systems we're operating today are incredibly complex, right? You've got internal systems that now include cloud databases like Snowflake and AWS. You've got the raft of vendors and service providers and systems that you're connecting to and sharing and exchanging data with. A real explosion of those data systems, even for small businesses, like you said. The way we think about that is privacy choices that people make if they're in the middle, based on the regulations on the left, need to be orchestrated through the data systems on the right. and not just orchestrated, but orchestrated and enforced, right? And I think what we're starting to hear is there's more obligation for data controllers to enforce those privacy signals, even in service provider systems. And Robert, I'm the only non-lawyer on this panel, but as you know, I'm happy to give legal advice, but I won't in this case. But tell me about.
It's clear you're treading on thin ice as you move into these legislative interpretations. So you're right. You're right. Kidding aside, one of the major challenges that privacy professionals have confronted post GDPR and with CCPA is the relationship between controllers and service providers, or controllers and processors, businesses, service providers. This was a lot simpler back in the day, where all a company had was an on-prem, hard drive, essentially. And as you mentioned, there's a multiplicity of data systems, both proprietary and third-party, that companies rely on. This is one of the major places where we need to shift from programs to programmatic. You do not need a static map or checklist of where your assets lie, or rather, that's not particularly helpful for you. GDPR Article 28, CPRA, closing a gap, arguably in CCPA, that says no more finger pointing about who is responsible for respecting privacy signals up and down the stream of data flow, right? The controllers are responsible and the processors are responsible. They need to contract it, but they also need to come up with systems that enable them to respect privacy choices no matter where the data is flowing, upstream, downstream, sideways. You still have to exercise control. That is a technical problem, i.e. a programmatic problem, that can't be solved with the kind of tools that entered this space originally.
Thanks, Ross. Stephanie, do you have a perspective there?
I would agree that the complexity has exploded in the last few years, and for privacy professionals to keep up, especially if you have a global business, you need help. You can't rely on spreadsheets anymore, and I think the legal has historically been slow to move to technology to help them, because we're very risk adverse. We tend to be, and we need to lean in and embrace it. And I think the first tools were coming out around GDPR time and trying to figure out how to help, but they're still very manual. And so for me, as an in-house attorney who's responsible for this, I am really looking for ways to lean on programmatic and tech, that's smart tech, to help do the day-to-day information gathering, and then also the trust but verify. Because if you do a spreadsheet, it's stale as soon as you moved on to the second interview to fill it out. And we need things that are dynamic and can keep up with the speed of business, and can take the load off the front line so they can focus on the business, and we can spend time on addressing issues or identifying issues before they become issues and fixing those, versus the really compliance heavy manual part of data gathering. So the first gen technologies, I think, really struggled with that. And I'm very excited to see the new generation coming out that is leveraging ML and AI, and focusing on what can you take off the plate of the day-to-day compliance, so that you can then analyze the data you're getting. We're doing what engineering has been doing for a long time, and using analytics and data. So I'm excited for that in the second generation tools.
Thanks, Stephanie. Well, let's go to the next slide and let's talk about spreadsheets. So we talk about first gen solutions. What were they exactly, and where's the world going? We'll give you our perspective. So first gen solutions were there to solve a specific problem, right? Regulations were there. You needed to implement privacy programs quickly. You needed ways to do privacy impact assessments. You needed ways to do ROPAs and whatnot. And so you dealt with those with spreadsheets, right? And spreadsheets have run the world for a significant amount of time. In addition to that, there were ways to do data cataloging, right? That have been around maybe for decades, but were multi-year projects in some instances. The way we see the world, especially as you look at data subject requests increasing in volume, as you think about all that complexity in systems that we talked about, the only way to really run privacy is what we call programmatic privacy, which is to be able to operate at scale. And as you said, Stephanie, operate at scale so frontline can have more time for you to be more productive and yeah, I will ask you in a second, what do you do with that extra time, right? Is it edge cases? Is it, what do you explore now that all this manual compliance is off the table? But the way we think about the world is we think there's a convergence. There's a convergence from these program management tools and tools that were really good at data control and data discovery. And those two things really need to come together to build a scalable solution. And so at Ketch, we were born at the nexus of that. And so we didn't start on one side or the other. We just built a privacy platform that is centered around data control. And we'll talk in a second about that being native, data discovery being native to a privacy solution and why that's important. But as we solve for some of this, and we're going to move in a second to the methods and some examples of how we solve for it. What would you do with the extra time, Stephanie? And what are you seeing in terms of the evolution of tools out there for privacy?
Yeah, I think just going back to having the time to think through the complex and knotty problems of how do you be privacy forward, but also leverage data to provide better products and services? How do we explain data privacy better to our consumers and even our clients? Even if you're a B2B company, how can you help your sales team, enable them to explain how you're dealing with data if you're in an industry where your customers really are now caring about that? So that's an area I'm actually looking forward to spending more time on is one, how do you deal with the new and different ideas that the business is coming up with of how to use data? And then how do you explain it to your customers and clients? And the other area that I am really looking forward to with the new, I'm excited to see what the companies like Ketch do. How do you help us analyze it? So it's one thing if now we have this mass of data coming in through tech tools, but we have to find the signal through the noise and be able to direct our attention to the highest value areas and also identify issues early so we can get ahead of them. And so that analysis piece is not going to go away because there's still a lot of judgment that you need to use in this area. It is a risk-based area. There are some things that there are clear lines happening, coming into clarity now, but there are others, much of it is still very gray area and judgment is needed. So to be able to spend the time on that and partnering with the business of creative ways to leverage that data, that's where I'm excited to spend the time and to have that analysis at my fingertips of where the data is going and focus there.
Thanks, Stephanie.
You might even, to merge with that, Stephanie, you might even say that the first generation reasonably was conservative and approached the thunderclap that was GDPR and then the ascendancy of CCPA with a reaction of, we got to shut everything down. And again, there's no disparagement there. That might have been the right reaction when people were still figuring out, what do these laws say? What does it mean for my business? 4% of global turnover seems like a big number of fines. But there's a new confidence that comes with getting more comfortable with these regulations. There's more interpretation from the EPDB. We see what the California Attorney General is saying about some of the enforcements that have been invisible to us as consumers of these rules. And so the new solutions have a little bit more freedom to take that confidence and build ways, as you suggest, Stephanie, to use the data and get utility from the data without running afoul of the regulations. We are moving, I think, from a lock it all down conservative, we don't understand what's going on, hysterical moment, to be a little bit hysterical myself, to a new, now that we've got our feet underneath us, now that we've got our sea legs in this new space, what can we still do with this data, which is undeniably valuable, without running into any sort of privacy trouble or getting sideways with our consumers who have new expectations? That's one of the major evolutions that's taking place. And I think the programmatic solutions have the opportunity to take advantage of that evolution.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also see another area where I'll be able to leverage this data is for those of us in tech companies where data is king and drives so many decisions. Now, this function, the privacy function, will have data at its fingertips to be able to go and have more solid conversations with engineering and product teams about a privacy and a data hygiene program that actually can help engineering and product make better decisions, and people will understand actually how stuff is built better, and they can move faster. So those are the things I'm getting chills, because like I'm very excited about getting to that place where we can have really we have that data, and we know that the monitoring, and where you mentioned about, you know, the hysterical conservative side of locking everything down. For some companies, they will need to be conservative because of the type of data they have, the industry they're in, the geographies they're in. They will need that approach, but I'm also excited to see that there will be choices of how companies can approach it based on their risk profile. And that I'm excited about too. So we don't all have to go to the lock it all down approach, because that's not what is intended by the laws, right? And so having the data, being able to make purposeful decisions with data, it's not the only thing. There is risk and judgment in there too, and understand the business, but that's a huge leap forward, I think, for the privacy function.
Thanks, Stephanie. I love what you said about the gray area and about the promise here. Let's talk about, if we can move to the next slide, let's talk about some of the methods here, some of the solutions. We've just given you 3 examples, and Stephanie and Robert have unpacked these. You know, firstly, we talked about how to easily respond to new regulations, right? And it is about leveraging the building blocks that Robert mentioned earlier, and being able to say, I need one place to go to be able to determine my data processing purposes. What am I doing with data? Being able to visualize that data and say, this is analytics, this is targeted advertising, this is, you know, whatever the case may be. But then Stephanie, as you make changes to that in terms of legal basis, or you're responding to a new regulation that says, and analytics is a great example, right? Because analytics under GDPR, it's opt-in consent. You might have an argument that analytics just requires disclosure to the consumer. And if you decide that that's where you want to go, you need to be able to input that into a system and say, for analytics in Europe, I'd like it to be X. And then that X needs to perpetuate into all the systems in which your consumers interact with you. So for example, on websites, now they need to be able to respond to that purpose. They need to be able to, once they've made that choice, it be orchestrated into all the systems it needs to be orchestrated into. And it starts to become important as we see the convergence, as we talked about earlier, with data discovery tools and classification tools, to be able to understand where data is in the business, how to assign a legal basis to that, and then go and get the appropriate consent for each of those. All that needs to happen automatically. And to your point, Stephanie, that happens automatically. You don't need to worry about it. You can focus now on other things. Robert, what do you think? Would you add anything to that?
You picked the perfect example there, because I'm sure there are folks who are more knowledgeable than you on this call who are familiar with the history of analytics, right? And there is a very strong argument that certain types of analytics tracking and processing, first party versus third party, for example, doesn't need to be opt-in, but rather could be simply disclosed and offered as an opt-out option under ePrivacy/GDPR. Okay, so that's the academic stuff. But how do you operationalize that? The way that we do it within Ketch is we have a canonical set of data processing purposes that you as a business have set up that are unique to what you do, whether it's targeted advertising or website analytics or employee payroll, right? It can be internal or external facing. You have all those data processing purposes. You, in a very simple UI, assign the appropriate legal basis in your judgment. And again, I'm using legal basis, which is admittedly a GDPR phrase, but that's one of those building blocks. Legal basis, to my estimation, is your justification to do a thing. And that's applicable across these regulations, whether you call it justification or legal basis or reason, whatever you call it. Point being, if the EPDB comes out and says, you know what, you no longer need opt-in consent for analytics, you go into our platform, you pick a different legal basis from the dropdown, you change it to disclosure or to opt-out, whatever or legitimate interest in that case, and it will flow through automatically into all of the various experiences, as we call them, and we'll show you an example in a moment or give you a better feel for that. It flows through automatically so that consumers and even your own internal data teams didn't have to have anything to do or be aware of that sort of change. It just happens driven by the appropriate person who made that change with 1 or 2 clicks. That's a programmatic solution to a real legal problem that allows your business to continue functioning.
Robert, what were we doing in the old days of 2018? I guess we were updating a legal basis. A lawyer would do that. Then they'd call someone on the web development team and say, here's what the experience needs to look like. And it's another meeting, it's more development time. Well, let's move beyond experiences and into orchestration of downstream systems. I know you want to talk to this. Robert, I just really want to know if you're going to say thunderclap again, because I've counted 2, and I think that should be the next poll. Will Robert find an opportunity to say it again?
That hurts. That hurts a little bit, and you're throwing me off my flow, I'll admit. So let me just get my head back here. We are going to talk about how you need to enforce these privacy choices up and down your ecosystem, as we hinted earlier. So remember the slide that JJ showed where we had a purported modern business that has 70 different places where they keep data, some proprietary, some third-party systems. What we're demonstrating to you with these screenshots on this slide is, okay, you need to present to consumers an opportunity for them to express their preferences. So at Ketch, we do that with data processing purposes. We don't have cookie banners that say, hey, what do you think about this analytics cookie versus this advertising cookie versus this essential cookie, right? That is, in our estimation, an antiquated e-privacy approach to the problem. What matters is communicating to the data subjects. And again, I'm talking about, it doesn't matter whether it's about California, Virginia, Colorado, these are the building blocks. As you need to, under the relevant regulation, communicate to the data subject what data you're collecting, what you're going to do with it, that's the purpose, and then get the appropriate permission. That's the legal basis. Our experiences allow you to do that in a dynamic fashion, whether you need to offer opt-out consent under perhaps a domestic state law, or whether you need opt-in consent under GDPR or one of the other more stringent opt-in jurisdictions. All of that's encapsulated in an experience that is intelligible, both in its literal sense and in the UI to the data subjects. Okay, then what do you have to do? Well, one of the big things that we are now programmatically helping people address is what we call web infrastructure. And we're not the only ones who call it that. But ad tech is complicated. The way that cookies and beacons and tags fire on your websites and in your applications is very complicated. We at Ketch come from an ad tech background. We understand this stuff well. So we offer things like an automatic integration with Google Tag Manager, where you simply go in to an integration that's in our platform and you say, I use Google Tag Manager. I perform the following data purposes. Please tell Google Tag Manager to control all of my other ad tech on my website according to these purposes. I know that sounds sort of vague and magical perhaps to you, but the idea is within our UI, you say, hey, these are my legal choices that I've set up within my policy. I want my ad tech to be controlled by these, but I don't want to have to go tinkering around in the actual infrastructure behind my website and my applications. We've done all the work to make sure that that stuff happens. Again, you're going to hear it one more time, not thunderclap, but programmatically, right? You need to do that programmatically so that you don't have to, as JJ says, have a meeting with your web team and try to explain to them the back and forth of what needs to happen. And regulators, as you all probably know, are focusing on this sort of thing. The CNIL is putting people on notice. The ICO is putting people on notice. We're going after you for the operation of your ad tech. The California AG came out and said that we think that using third-party cookies on your ad tech on your websites and in your applications does constitute a sale under CCPA. So how are you going to offer an opt-out to that? This is a real problem that needs to be solved. Then what do you do downstream? And you've heard us mention this several times. It is a requirement, increasingly explicit, that you be able to respect consumers' privacy choices no matter where you've sent that data. So if you've ushered in some third party onto your website or into your Dataverse to perform some sort of service for you, whether it's email marketing or behavioral advertising, you need to be able real time to respect those consumer choices that may change. What do I mean? When a consumer comes to your website and says, I've changed my mind, I'm no longer comfortable with targeted advertising, and they withdraw that consent, what do you do about the fact that yesterday they said that they were okay with that, and you sent that okay signal essentially down to LinkedIn or to Google or to Facebook or to wherever it went? You need to retract that. You need to unwind that. And it can't be because someone on your team sent an email to LinkedIn and says, hey, have you seen pseudonymous identifier XYZ? They opted out. What are we going to do? We have software that solves that automatically, which is the only way to solve that problem. So that's what we refer to as orchestration. And it works for both consent signals or legal basis oriented signals, as well as for data subject rights fulfillment. And we don't need to go down that road right now, but just understand that it works that way. Any thoughts from JJ or Stephanie about what I've just described?
Yeah, thanks, Robert. Stephanie, do you have anything? I was going to make a couple comments.
Yeah, I wanted to underline that the enforcement part, and especially in the marketing space, like as we were going through GDPR, marketing was often at the bottom of the list for if you had an in-house lawyer to look at it. And once they got there, they're just like, oh my gosh, this is a crazy environment. I don't even know where to start. And it's very easy with your marketing teams who are trying to be really creative and use a ton of tooling. How do you get that? How do you honor the consumer's choice? And so having a programmatic solution that sends that signal out and to all the different systems, it allows you to just focus on with your marketing team, like what systems are you adding in? How are we sending that signal? And then you know that signal is going and your company is honoring consumers' choices. That's a massive step forward to have solutions that do that programmatically.
Solving that wasn't easy, Stephanie. The two things I'll mention there is to be able to orchestrate privacy choices into service provider systems. The key thing we found is that you need to speak their language, or you need to speak a common language, which is privacy. So one of the ways to communicate with vendors like that is through APIs, right? Programming interfaces. And you often need a specialized privacy API to be able to communicate all the things you want to communicate. The thing is, they don't exist. Less than 10% of companies or service providers have privacy APIs. So one of the hills we have to climb at Ketch is to basically build these and build a common language where you can communicate privacy preferences, where you're able to say, for person X, for analytics, they just revoke their consent. Here's the signal. I need to configure this in your system to make sure you don't process that data, or I need to execute this delete. And even looking at data subject requests, right? Access and deletions are the ones we see most commonly. There haven't been end-to-end solutions for that. There's been emails flowing around. I'm just going to email somebody at Salesforce or whatever data owner owns this particular system and let them know that this person needs to be deleted. I think those days are gone. As we see more volume in those requests, it's just impossible to do it that way. The other piece is when you introduce banners like you're seeing on the left here on websites, there are ways to do that don't introduce a ton of latency on the page. And we've just only become wise to this. As we look around at some of what's out there with these banners, folks that have tried to do this without a huge technical background are also introducing a ton of page latency. And I'm talking something like a 20% drop in performance. And you drop page load time like that, even though this is an important initiative, it's going to have some real effects downstream in your business and for revenue growth. And so part of what we'd have to figure out is how to do that and do it in a way that's efficient so you can deliver a privacy experience but don't impact the page, right? And this, back to our example, Stephanie, about working across the organization, you're able to implement a privacy program, make the web team happy, make the revenue team happy with solutions that work with the KPIs that they're measured against.
I just want to underscore that point, JJ, is when you're talking to your business teams, getting good solutions in saves engineering time. It also makes it a way better experience for your customers, which is win-win for everyone. So yes, there's this is an investment in your business, putting in a programmatic privacy solutions. It truly is, because to your point, JJ, latency on a page, if someone's trying to get to the content and we're trying to put a compliance program in place, and then it's slowing everything down, like nobody's happy. But there are ways now with the technology to do it to make it faster. Also, going back to the opt-outs, if someone's getting emails that they do not want, or they're getting banner ads they do not want, and then they keep seeing them when they opted out, that's going to make them even more unhappy, versus maybe they are not ready to have it now, but you'll have a touch point later, and they'll be more open and receptive to receiving whatever sales message you're sending. So it will have a really positive flywheel effect it is an investment in the consumer experience for the business as well as a compliance investment.
Such a great way to think about it, Stephanie. You know, I'm thinking back to that original poll where 50% of the folks in this audience were saying, you know, we're just starting to look at this. We've also just started to have people ask about latency and ask about all these questions that have implemented the first gen solutions and said, oh, you know, they worked for us in 2018, they worked for us in 2019, but now we're looking for something different. And we're starting to see the impacts across the business, we want to solve for those. And I think there's a real opportunity for people who are evaluating solutions today to just move to the 2021 solutions, right? Rather than have to go through the pain we all went through. But anyway, let's go to the next slide. Robert, was there?
There's a poll actually. We're gonna launch another poll to this point about orchestration that we've been describing. So this is a question. I'll read it again for those who watch later. What process does your organization have in place to control consumer privacy preferences in downstream or vendor systems? And the answers are, and I hope someone will go for this. The first one is, we need to do that? Question mark. We do it manually, mostly by email. We have a tool, but it's most like a checklist. And then we have an automated end-to-end solution. So the answers are coming in, and I'm going to give folks, let's see, 5 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, let's close the poll, see what we've got.
So that's perfect, Robert. Look at that. So we do it manually, mostly by email, you know, nearly 40%, and we have a tool, but it's most like a checklist, 40%, 80% between those two. That's exactly what we're talking about. That kind of manual compliance doesn't have to happen anymore. You can do all this programmatically, you can do it at scale.
The other thing I would point out is that for the 5 who have an automated end-to-end solution, first, kudos to you. Secondly, I will guess that some of you built that, and that's developer time that you may have been able to better spend on other things that cannot be purchased in the marketplace. So it's a good thing to do, but it's not necessarily the highest best use of talented folks. So let's go now to the next slide that we have, or everyone, reminder, X out of the poll slide so you can see the slide.
All the 14% was Ketch clients, right, Robert? Don't forget, we got a few of those on the line. Yeah,
that's right.
Cool. So we talked about data discovery being native, and pardon the shameless plug there. We talked about data discovery being native to the privacy solution. What do we mean by that? And what are the benefits of that? So a lot of companies don't have a 100% handle on the data they have out there, right? Systems have been inherited, new people have been put in place, and as that has grown, there could be a database somewhere running some script that includes personal information, and you may not know about it. And as you do those data discovery exercises, you could see 20, 30% of your data that you've now newly discovered, and that it could include personal information. Obviously, that has a risk profile to it. I think one of the biggest influences or catalysts for a data breach is time. And the more you don't understand your data and the longer you leave it, the more you could be potentially exposed. In addition to the implication it could have for cyber security insurance and whatnot. So why is it important? What are some of the things you get out of this? You do the data discovery exercise, you know where your data is, you've classified it, you know what's personal, you know what's not personal. You plug that straight into the policy center that we showed you earlier. When you're talking about legal basis now, you're looking at actual data assets. And you can say, these are used for analytics. And that solves a privacy problem today. But what it also solves for in the future is, you know, Stephanie, one of the things I love that you said is that privacy and security are kind of the same thing, right? And I think that's not well understood, I think, in the market, because it absolutely is. And having data discovery plugged into your privacy solution means that you can see which data you have available. You can deploy policies on it that are purpose-based. You know, back to your point, Robert, about cookie solutions out there not really going all the way. What you really need, not just from a transparency to consumers perspective, not just this isn't a cookie that's running on your website. We're doing analytics, we're doing targeted advertising. Here are the cookies that do that. This is our data processing purpose. And then being able to control access and security across the organization based on that purpose, to be able to say, if there's a use case for analytics somewhere in my business, I need to be able to control that and understand who's using it for what purpose. And if I need to apply some kind of security protocol to that, so for example, if an analyst wants to see a data set, but I would like to tokenize that or anonymize that in some way, that should be part and parcel of this solution. And so these data governance elements and privacy elements start to come together. So as we look forward over the next 3 to 5 years, it starts to unlock a whole lot more use cases, especially with AI, right? And the ability to use ethical data sets, the ability to statistically anonymize and reduce some of the bias that we may be introducing in machine learning models. All that starts to become capable. I think it starts to realize the benefits of privacy by design. I'll give you an example of some of where you could take this. We do regular client syncs across our business, and our clients are heavily involved in our roadmap. And one of the things one of our clients mentioned recently is, I would love to solve for the automation of end of life, right? I've got a retention policy. It's great that Ketch can deliver transparently what that retention policy is to the consumer, but there's no real way to control the actual deletion of data when that retention policy comes up. And so it only took us 2 weeks, by the way, but because we could now solve for that by having the data assets discovered and mapped, having purposes mapped to that, we could now say, well, I can see the retention policy of data assets. Because I can automate a delete, like I do with the data subject request, I can now automate an end of life request based on that policy. And it's one tiny example of how our clients are coming up with use cases and things that are important to them. And because data governance is part of this privacy solution, we can start to unlock those. And now I'm getting chills, Stephanie, about some of the promise here, because we may not know all the use cases, right? But we know we have the foundational elements to solve for that.
And JJ, that you don't discount the power of what you just described, because per my soapbox earlier about the evolution from perhaps overly conservative legacy solutions to more confidence to be able to take advantage of data utility. Data retention or data deletion can now be done in a much more targeted, granular way, as you say, to express a particular policy that a business has. Instead of wipe my S3 bucket clean of everything I have in there because X date has arrived, you could have a purpose-based assignment or an attribute-based assignment or some sort of more granular affiliation for that data, again, to express a retention purpose or to enact a retention purpose or a deletion purpose. It's also a perfect example of how you can bring the requirements of some of these laws around sensitive data to asset management and privacy principles. What do I mean? If you need to keep track of special categories of personal data under GDPR, or you need to enact the new limitation in CPRA to limit the processing of sensitive personal information, that's a perfect merging of an asset management or a data discovery problem, a characterization of data problem, with a privacy choice problem. So you need to bring together, technically, the way that consumers or data subjects express their choices around particular categories of data. That's a hard technical problem to solve, and it's essentially unsolvable manually. Another move, programs to programmatic. You can't get there without having a lot of data hygiene, a lot of automation, and the ability to match consumer preferences automatically to the data attributes, which is something that we can achieve.
Such a great point, Robert, because it's not just about solving it manually. Some of it is actually unsolvable without a programmatic solution. Well, let's ask Stephanie one more question, and then we can take questions if there are any. So Stephanie, one of the things Robert and I were debating as we kind of came up with a title for this webinar, we said programs for programmatic, we're going to talk about methods and mindsets. And Robert said, are we going to talk about mindsets? Like, are we really talking about mindsets? And I was like, I don't know, I guess we're talking about mindsets, but I was curious, Stephanie, I think you might be the best person to solve this for us. Is this a mindset shift? Like, is it a different way of thinking as you think about programmatic privacy in a legal function like this?
Yeah, I think it's if you talk to people who've been doing privacy for a long time, years ago, it felt like we were, calling into the darkness of, hey, we need to pay attention to this. It was very manual. There wasn't a shared language or a shared understanding of what this meant to the business. Enter GDPR, CCPA, all the things we've talked about. And now the world has exploded in complexity and the risks are higher for not getting it right, both with regulators, but also with consumers and your customers, if you're B2B, who also care about this and are looking at it more, which means you have to be able to scale. There are very few companies that don't have to deal with this at scale. And so as lawyers and compliance professionals, again, as I mentioned earlier, we tend to be risk averse, and it's hard for us to embrace things where we lose control of what we're doing. So this is, I think, a mind shift of how do we use technology to supplement what we're doing, to elevate us to be able to really use our judgment on the hard stuff, but also trust the technology to get us there, because we are having to give up a little bit of control. But that's where I go to the analytics, where we can see what's happening. I think we'll be able to trust it better. But it is a bit of a mind shift, I think, for many. I know there are some who are on the cutting edge who've been trying to automate and build their own bespoke systems. But this is an exciting time to be able to lean into the technology, partner with it. I also think for those of us in tech companies, it will enable us to have language, shared language with our engineering teams to help make the solutions even better, including on the back end infrastructure that people don't see, but makes the business move faster if you get it right. So I do think it's a mind shift there. And one other thing, I just wanted to circle quickly back on the last question, which was about the data deletion and not having to, blow out a whole database when you hit a retention date. There are also companies that have data retention requirements. So they're in conflict often with the privacy perspective of we have to delete stuff. There are also companies like financial companies and healthcare companies that have data they have to keep for other regulatory reasons. And so you can't do that at scale manually. You have to have a programmatic solution for it. And again, going back to, I think the change in the risk profile, the change in complexity, the need to do this at scale, it has led to a mindset shift.
Thanks, Stephanie. I think that's one for JJ. That's 0 for Robert on the mindsets thing. I appreciate that. But such a great point on the granularity.
We lost 2 participants. When you introduced that, we lost 2 participants.
All right. Hey, Stephanie, I appreciate you, and Robert, thanks so much, man. You know what? You're the thunderclap. Michelle, did you want to close out? If there's any more questions, we can happy to take those.
Great. Yep. Thank you so much. And just a few parting words and reminders as we're wrapping up the session here. I'm Michelle from Ketch, from our marketing team. I can see that Jordan has posted the survey already in the chat, but just wanted to share with everyone, please head over to Ketch.com, where you can upgrade your privacy solution for free with our Ketch OTC free offering. We'd love to chat with you further about any of the challenges in your program today. If you liked what you heard here, we'd love to connect. So head over to Ketch.com to book a meeting with a privacy expert. We are hosting a happy hour, and we'd love to continue the conversation. You'll be able to sign up with the link posted in the deck, or email us at info@ketch.com to sign up. And also check out our privacy primer. JJ's thought leadership continues at Ketch.com. If you head over to resources, you can download our privacy primer to learn more. And again, please take the survey and tell us how we did.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks, Robert. You guys are the best.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. That was a really great discussion. And as Michelle mentioned, we also have a survey link in our chat for IAPP. So go ahead and give us your feedback really quickly. It does help improve our web conferences a great deal. That's pretty much it. So that wraps our program here for today. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we hope to see you in another IAPP web conference soon.